Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dick Merritt, United States Marine Corps retired. Today is the 2nd of December, 2011. We are recording at GrassRoots TV in Aspen, Colorado. We are interviewing Captain Heinz Coordes, U.S. Air Force. Welcome, Heinz.
Thank you.
Glad to have you with us.
Great to be here.
And your birth date is 20 December 1942.
Oh, yes.
And the people running the interview are myself, Lieutenant Colonel Dick Merritt, interviewer, Patrice Kahn on camera, Rise Aponics is sound engineer, and our logger is Karen Woodard. We are working for and members of the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress in association with the Aspen Historical Society and GrassRoots TV. Heinz served in Vietnam. He was a captain. He served also in Thailand. And we're going to go right to Heinz and talk just a little bit about where you were raised and how you got into the Air Force. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was born in the Panhandle of Nebraska, and our family moved to Fort Morgan, Colorado in 1950. Mm-hmm. And that's basically where I grew up and graduated from high school. And from there I went into college at CSU, Colorado State, and as things were going along towards graduation, this Vietnam thing started coming to the fore, and it became obvious that was, since I was 1A and a bachelor, and mm-hmm. and things were, it was part of my future. It looked like graduating in '65. I had a business degree out of CSU, and the thing about CSU was a land grant college, which meant there were 2 years of mandatory reserve officer training, ROTC, and so I signed into that and enjoyed that, and particularly as the in the 3rd year it became possible to get a pilot's license through that program, and so the Air Force paid for that, and I really took to it. I enjoyed it. I have had an interest in aviation since childhood. I had just about every model airplane ever made, mm-hmm. and but anyway, so I did get a private license while still at college.
Before you graduated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as graduation came down and the assignments came in, I did some testing and passed for physical and the aptitude things for pilot, and away I went.
Let's back up just a little bit.
Sure.
In high school, were you involved in athletics or any leadership positions in high school?
Football, basically.
Football.
I think, yeah, and did a little track.
Mm-hmm. And in order to get in the Air Force and do this high G performance, you had to be physically fit.
Yeah, that was definitely part of it.
And did your parents have a farm, or were they in
Well,
town?
my dad was in the insurance business. He had his own agency there and did that. And my mother was a housewife, and I had one sister, or have one sister.
I know your sister. She's
Yeah.
here, an ambassador for the ski company.
Yeah, she's
her.
great. Yeah, she does volunteer at the thrift
Sure.
shop and different things around here.
Yeah. Was there anything different about your family as far as the background, where they came from, or if they spoke any foreign languages?
Well, my dad and mother were both from Germany, so I was the first generation born here, mm-hmm. and the rest of that family stayed over there, and but my dad arrived in 1928 as a bachelor and mm-hmm. worked. He had an uncle in Nebraska, and so he ended up sponsoring my dad to mm-hmm. come, and during those Depression years, he was basically like a Fuller Brushman, did
Put
house
food on the
calls
table,
and
yeah.
all that, and and he was extremely frugal, and he bought a 5 and dime store, and he became pretty good at that, and then he started another one, and then he ended up working more than my mother wanted him to, so we moved to Fort Morgan in 1950, and then he went into the insurance business and did that the rest of his life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, our backgrounds are somewhat similar. I had a Navy scholarship at the University of Washington in 4 years, and I went in. I could have gone the Navy, but I liked the Marine Corps, and I liked it so much I stayed for 20 years. So,
my dad was injured in a farm accident and had a stiff leg, so he was exempted from any military service. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, after you got commissioned in the Air Force, where did you go for your pilot training?
Well, I went to Enid, Oklahoma, Vance Air Force Base, and that was in October of '65. And that process takes a year, and you start out in a little prop job, which is basically what we did in college, and for only about, I think it was about 12 hours, and then you graduate into ever-increasing performance machines, the T-37, which was a pretty small airplane, but it was a lot of fun. You could, it was the only Air Force plane you could intentionally spin, and boy, you could have a good time with that.
Did you have any choice as to what type of aircraft you would fly?
Well, out of the undergraduate pilot training, the process is you're graded on everything, and your standing in the class determines what choice you make. So the first guy gets first choice, and at that time, the main bulk of the need in the Air Force was for F-4 pilots, and someone in the echelon, in the upper ranks, decided that we needed to have a pilot in the back seat of the F-4, and so we were a little bit less than thrilled to be in the back seat, but it was a great apprenticeship, and it lasted only about like 9-10 months in the back seat, and I went back and upgraded, but so it was dependent on your standing in the class to be able to choose what you wanted, and the F-4 was my first choice.
Well, we loved the F-4. We had F-4s in the Marine Corps and close air support where I was up on the DMZ, and they're quite an aircraft. How long were you committed to the Air Force?
Well, out of pilot training, they give you a 5-year commitment. It's an expensive process, and they want to get their money's worth out of the training process. So that was okay with me. I really enjoyed that whole thing. I really took to it and loved it. It was a very exhilarating time to fly jets and be that young and have fun. Yeah.
Well, there's a saying in the Air Force that you want to have the same amount of landings as you had takeoffs, but along those lines, we used to train survival school, and did you have any survival training?
Well, out of pilot training, we went to Fairchild, which is around Spokane, Washington area, and that was a 2-week school, and probably 2 of the most miserable weeks I've ever spent, because this was in October, and the weather was it was snowing and raining the whole time we were there, and the first week, well, you do some classroom stuff, and then they send you out into the bush, and you go out there with minimal things to get by, and so you don't eat much, and you're wet and you're cold, and so it almost became a matter of survival.
I used to be an instructor for the Marine Corps Survival School in the Sierras. So you're in the cold. How about any tropical training?
Well, before that, we went for sea survival school in Florida, Homestead Air Force Base, just south of Miami, and that was a fairly short course, but you learned how to, if you had to go down in the water, deal with your life raft and all the paraphernalia you have with you. And then at that stage, then we started getting our assignments down, and it was my assignment was to Ubon, Thailand, and en route there, we stopped off at the Philippines and did a jungle survival course, and that was a couple weeks there.
They call that snake school, right?
Snake school, yeah, yeah.
I was there for 2 years.
Yeah.
I know about those animals there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So your first tour was in August of '67, and you went to the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing for 433 Tactical Fighter Squadron.
Right.
And can we discuss a little bit about some of your missions from there over into North Vietnam and Laos?
Yeah. Well, at that
take a look
time,
at the map.
yeah, at that time there was a ginning up of the air campaign against North Vietnam, and it had been going on for a couple of years already, and it was just kind of a gradual increase of pressure to try to get North Vietnam to come to the negotiating table. And initially, a lot of targets were kind of taboo. They were off limits. I mean, you could really get in trouble if you got too close to Hanoi, too close to a MiG base. You couldn't touch a MiG if they were on the ground and things like that. But then, as I arrived, it was starting to be a lot looser as far as what they were targeting, and so it was an increase in pressure on the North Vietnamese and an increase in stress level for us too.
Right. Well, let's go ahead.
This is a map of the general area, and for our purposes, North Vietnam is broken down into 6 what they called route packs, and the DMZ being here, and you were from there south. That's just not appearing on there, but anyway, it was called route pack 1 and 2, and then increasing up to route pack 6. And 1 and 2 were our basically training grounds. They were a little easier in that they didn't have some of the defenses that you found in the Hanoi area. You didn't encounter MiG aircraft, and you didn't encounter surface-to-air missiles, generally speaking, although they did, and particularly later they did bring it down. And then the middle packs, 3, 4, 5, and 6B, belonged to, that was Navy territory. So
Task Force 77.
So we left that territory to them, and we got 6 Alpha, which is the Hanoi area, which was the most heavily defended area probably in aviation.
Let's take a look at the map on the wall at this time. We'll step up there. I'm going to come up with you to show you where I was, and we'll discuss that.
Oops.
Watch your cord, Heinz.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, this is our general area. It doesn't show South Vietnam because we didn't operate generally in the south where Dick was, and we were based over here just off the map. And this is depicting not a typical mission, but one of the big missions that I was on. And I'll walk you through that. But anyway, this is the Chinese border up here, and Hainan Island, which is Chinese, and then the DMZ is right here. This is the border between Laos and North Vietnam, and then this is the northern part of Thailand right in here, okay? And when we would take off, well, there were, the tour length was 100 missions, and so you needed to get 100 missions over North Vietnam to make it back to the States. And there was another campaign going on, and it was really a secret war. We didn't talk to our parents about it. We weren't allowed to say anything about it. And I don't know how much was really said otherwise, but we were kind of out of the loop of what people generally knew.
Where was that?
And this was in Laos, and there were 2, the Air Force broke them down. The southern part of Laos, that campaign was called Steel Tiger, and the northern part of Laos was called Barrel Roll. And what happened was there was a trade-off. Laos was neutral, and so we didn't really let on, and the North Vietnamese didn't let on that they were in there too. But it was a trade-off that our politicians made to support the forces that were loyal to the Royal Laotian government. and those efforts. We gave them air support on that, so we did a lot of, or quite a bit of close air support on that sort of operation.
Well,
and
let me
the
just give you a
trade-off-
little
Yeah.
orientation here. Where I was, it was up on the DMZ and the I Corps with Vietnamese Paratroop Battalion of Marines, and you mentioned you did a support for Con Tien in the I Corps, south of the DMZ. And they supported me when I was up on the DMZ and they were coming after us, so I'm very familiar with Con Tien. Can you locate Haiphong and Hanoi on the map here?
Sure. The port of Haiphong is right here on the coast, and that was a major shipping port for a lot of the materials that came in from Russia and China that was supporting their effort. And Hanoi is here under this little triangle. I'll get to that later. But and a couple of the supply routes there was a very active railroad called the Northeast Railroad, and there was a Northwest Railroad. And this was a Red River that flowed diagonally across that part and down to the Red River Delta there.
One of
right past
the
Hanoi.
historical points in 1954, Dien Bien Phu, the French fell. Can you point out Dien Bien Phu roughly?
Let's see.
We had it on the other map.
Yeah, it's right in here somewhere.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, we
quite
in the
see
general area
it's,
right here.
It's right in here.
Right,
Yeah.
and that was end of end of the French.
Yeah. It was kind of funny. We almost used that as a checkpoint in that we really never had a target there, but they had anti-aircraft positions there, and they would just, when we'd pass over that area, they would always just shoot up in the air to let us know they're there, I guess, and it was like, oh yeah, there's Dien Bien Phu.
Dien Bien Phu, famous Dien Bien Phu.
No threat, but they just kept letting us know they were there. But
good,
anyway,
good.
Anyway, back into Laos, the Ho Chi Minh Trail came down from Hanoi through Vietnam, and there were a couple of entry points where the roads went into Laos, and from there the materials and troops would go down into Cambodia and into South Vietnam.
See, that was what I was fighting, was the Ho Chi Minh Trail when they come in here, and we had what we call arc light strikes, B-52s coming in from Guam, and we could set our clocks to when they came in, and they were trying to do the bombing here in that area there. But at that time when I was there, McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, was putting in a electronic line which didn't work. An elephant could set it off, and it was a great idea, but it didn't work. And so I think the mission
didn't work for you. So
No,
I think they tried putting it in over here.
Yeah.
Too. it had some success, but
it
not,
had some,
but not.
So basically, you did the interdiction on the supply routes, and
that
was your mission to.
Yeah, the targets around the Route Pack 6 were really high interest targets for the Pentagon, for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the President, McNamara, and so a lot of those targets were dictated by Washington, you know, and so we would wait for the word every night, where are we going tomorrow? And finally it would come down, and then you'd do your planning for the next day. The barrel roll missions were, as I said, it was interesting, because you'd go into the hinterlands, and there would be a forward air controller that we worked with. They were called Ravenfax, and they were U.S. Air Force personnel, but in the airplane, it was an old prop job that they had, and in the back seat of that was a Laotian observer, and he coordinated where the need was for a strike. So we would go up perchance to a little mountaintop village that was under siege and lay some stuff in to help them out.
You see, as the war developed, they built up their air defenses and their logistics. And I was down here. I'd been trained as an aerial observer in an 01, which is pretty slow and pretty vulnerable up there, you know, spotting rounds. So then it became that we needed to become more sophisticated and have the F4s come in on the these missions. And how long was it before you became a forward air controller?
Well, that was quite a ways down the road yet.
We'll get to that a little
yeah,
later.
Yeah, it was on my second tour,
Yeah.
a little over halfway through
Because
that.
they're looking for the experienced
Yeah.
pilots there.
Yeah.
And
So as I said, the first tour was 100 missions in North Vietnam, and then the missions that you flew in Laos didn't do anything for you as far as getting you closer to going home.
to go home.
So we
secret,
kind of, oh my gosh, it's a non-counter. And
Yeah.
so there were counters and non-counters, and
Yeah.
and you just hated to do those because you could just as easily get, and a lot of guys did get shot
Right.
down
Well,
on
in
on
our
that
pre-interviews,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
told me what a fact was in the Air Force. In the Marine Corps, down here, we have what they call Anglical Air Naval Gunfire Liaison. And you have an aviator. He's not flying, but he's on the ground with the radio, and you have naval gunfire, and you have artillery to support the infantry. So the mission to be supported was configured differently for down here than what you had up here.
Yeah, but they they used different aircraft. The 19 that you were talking about, and they used an O2. It was a push-pull Cessna. And they're pretty slow moving, and
They used the Warthog, the OV-10.
no, that came in later.
That came in later?
Yeah, they used a OV-10, which was OV-10. I'm sorry.
Yeah, OV-10.
I was thinking Warthog, and
Yeah.
the Bronco.
The Bronco,
Yeah,
yeah.
we used some of those. Those were nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we can perhaps go back in.
Well,
anything else you want to point out on the map?
I was going to point out
We'll just point out a lot of things. here.
not a typical, but one of the more memorable flights that I had was it was called an Alpha Day Strike Force, which was to hit this railroad and highway bridge. It's a mile-long bridge. It was a big bridge, just on the outskirts of Hanoi. And I'd just like to maybe walk you through what that entails.
What was the name of that bridge?
Paul Doomer Bridge.
Doomer. That's, yeah.
Amazing thing is you can go on YouTube and see motor scooters going across it now. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember that. But anyway, so we would get the orders late afternoon or early evening back here in Thailand, and I was fortunate enough to be crewed with I was in the back seat at this one with a flight commander, one of the more senior individuals in the squadron, and we were tapped to lead this thing. And the strike force consisted of about 32 airplanes, and so it really required a lot of coordination and a lot of briefing and planning ahead. But anyway, so we would, I went down to the headquarters and laid out the route and planned that all. And it, like you say, with the B-52s, you plan it down to the minute.
Right.
Everything is timed and choreographed and it has to come off like that because otherwise it gets all fouled up. But anyway, then you go to a brief and there's like 60 guys in the room, and you get intelligence briefing, weather briefing, and general plan of the attack. And each flight, there's like I think 8 flights in this thing, has a particular role to play in the strike force. Like 2 of them would be MiG caps to cover against attacking aircraft. A flight would be flak suppression. He would roll in a little bit ahead of you to keep the gunners' heads down while everybody else does their work. And then there were SAM suppression flights as well that would counter the SAM threat on the way in.
Well, you came in from the sea. Was there anybody else coming in from any other direction?
Well, yeah, there was a water side and the land side, and there were other bases involved. Particularly there was an identical operation going on from a base further over to the west here. That they flew F-105s, which is a tremendous airplane, and they did the initial strike on the bridge, and they preceded us by a couple minutes. So the coordination was
how was this all controlled? You have Navy out here, maybe could have been called in. and the Air Force, and all these aircraft in the air. How was that controlled?
Well, the Navy was doing their own thing. We didn't.
High-flying.
We weren't even on the same radio frequency, so we didn't really hear too much on their deal. But so we go off, and there are these. I've depicted these fueling tracks, and there are KC-135s waiting out here for the arriving aircraft. I can show you some pictures of that later. But so we take off, and it's still dark, and you're making your way across the DMZ, just south of the DMZ, and then you rendezvous with the tankers, and you cycle through and get your fuel topped off.
How many times did you refuel on this mission?
On every mission, you needed to refuel twice. Once inbound and once outbound.
Right.
Yeah. And so you, and all the while you're on the tanker. They're proceeding up to a drop-off rendezvous point, and so you're there at the minute, and you're there at the spot. So it was really, really impressive to see these airplanes coming in. You know, there were 30 airplanes starting to converge at this drop-off point, and then the blood pressure comes up, and the excitement you can cut with a knife, and about this time it's just starting to get light, and then you proceed under the direction of the mission commander, which in this case was us.
Concurrently, there were the arc light strikes, the B-52s. We would program them. I was at the command post with the general, and it had visqueen, and we looked at our watches, and they said, well, it should be down, and the sound waves would shake, and then we would hear the sound, and they were always accurate and on time. It was unbelievable. All the way from Guam.
Yeah, oh, I know, yeah. Well, it was amazing. Nobody was ever late, and the tankers were always there. You wouldn't want to be a minute late, because a minute late puts you about 8 miles behind, you know, and you can't do that, you know. So it was really important, and everybody made it, you know, as far as making their times and everything. So anyway, then we proceed in, and you're getting beyond the range of navigational aids, so you're kind of on your own as far as navigation with your self-contained inertial systems, which weren't as accurate as what we have now, and they were notoriously inaccurate sometimes. But anyway, so I had planned this route to try to circumvent as many of the surface-to-air defenses, which you start picking up anywhere on the coast here. And I've got some pictures I can show you in a bit here when we of the threats. So anyway, you're starting to pick up SAMs at this stage, and that was quite a nerve-wracking time when you had those launched at you. It's a surface-to-air missile is a SAM, and they're 40 feet long, and they shoot them up, and in a matter of seconds they're going 3,000 miles an hour towards you. They're
like a telephone pole?
It's like a flying telephone pole with a flame behind it, and you can see these things launch out 10 miles, and the thing will come up, and you can see it. And when it's stationary on your canopy, you know you're in trouble.
Right. You have to maneuver to get out of the way.
Well, we had electronic gear that would let you know when the radar of the SAM site was painting you, and this gear would had a series of lights that would show when it's painting you, and when they lock onto you, and when they launch, the launch light goes on, and it was kind of like an electronic rattlesnake. It was like a terrible sound. You hated to hear it. But anyway, the technique was to evade it, and so you would push over, which was a very uncomfortable thing, into a negative G situation, and it was kind of an art to the timing of it. And you would wait till you see this SAM start to track you down and arc towards the negative, and then at the proper time you'd pull up like hell and let the thing hopefully overshoot you. And
physically. I was reading about Colonel Robin Olds, a famous brigadier general, retired out of the Air Force Academy. He was an ace in World War II, and he was in Vietnam and flying the F-4s. And what I read was that he said the flak up here over Hanoi was heavier than anything he'd seen in World War II. Could you address the flak?
Well, I didn't have that benefit of the age
You didn't?
to judge that with, but
Yeah.
it was certainly the heaviest I've ever seen.
Yeah.
As we came into it, one of the other lights on this radar homing and warning device would point out when you had anti-aircraft, radar-guided anti-aircraft fire aimed at you. It's called fire can. It was an 85 millimeter, and you look out and it's like bursting right off your wingtip, and you just say move right, move left, and I don't know how that stuff tracked us that close, but anyway, we got by there. But as we came into the Hanoi area, as I said, that the other strike force had already come in and hit the bridge, and successfully, I might add, and knocked down several spans of this mile-long bridge. And as we came into there was a lot of flak left over from their force, and then we had the stuff that was coming up against us, and it was well, I'll show you that picture later. Anyway,
you're flying the aircraft as a pilot. In order to keep administrative things and kind of keep balance on everything, you had a backseater that.
I was a backseater.
You
at this
did
point.
both.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was the?
Well, you're running you're the eyeballs for one. You're running the navigation issues. You're running the radar. You're helping out on everything. You're doing a lot of the refueling. I had a very gracious front seater in that he let me get a lot of stick time, and that was really important to my development, and I really appreciated that. But anyway, we came up to the roll-in point, and it was like, I didn't think, and this is not an exaggeration, I didn't think it was possible to physically fly through that without getting hit. We did get a little scratch, a little light hit, but it wasn't anything that ruined the systems, and we took inventory real quick, and it was okay, and we continued on through. And to give you an idea, the last 20 miles of this, and this would be about this far, we covered in a little over 2 minutes.
Wow.
We were screaming.
Things are moving a lot of territory.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to the surface-to-air missiles, they had MiGs up here, MiG-21s. Did you ever encounter any MiGs?
Yeah, not on this mission. It was kind of a hit and miss thing on the MiGs. One, if you were carrying bombs, you didn't have a gun, which was a handicap. And at the time, the rule of engagement was you had to visually get close enough to the MiG before you shot to identify and be darn sure who you're shooting at, because there's 30 some airplanes out there trying to do the same thing. And so anyway, you had to get close enough to identify them, and by the time you did that, you were too close for your missiles, so you had to back out. So it was really kind of a complicated maneuver to be able to get into a firing position and out, unless you had a gun with you, which
those
you didn't.
weapon systems are programmed, you know, for a certain height. Now, I read about one of the pilots on this Doomer Bridge. He got down too low, and the arming distance on the bomb, you know, wouldn't supposedly work on paper, but it did, and he pulled out and got out of it. He was in a dive, and
well, you're diving down. You're going like 500 miles an hour on this dive, and in a 60-degree dive. So you don't have too many seconds to make adjustments and to pull out. You know? But anyway, we pulled out, and coming back out of there were a couple MiG-17s. But we were going so fast. They're an old, you know, 50s vintage, but they were formidable. They had a big gun on them, and they could outturn an F4, you know. And so you had to be careful. But we were going so fast that they couldn't. They were looking for somebody that had battle damage, and they could pick up a straggler, and so they were down low, and so we just kept on. You know, we had a successful day. We were just cooling it and beating feet for back out to the tanker.
Well, I was a ground officer, and the closest I can visualize this is the movie Top Gun that Tom Cruise did, and then you were involved in that Top Gun in the Air Force later.
Well, we can get into that later. Yeah,
get into that later.
That's way later. Yeah.
That's way later.
Yeah,
but the point is that the speed that they were going and the time they had to make the decisions was just instantaneous.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and you had to live with it or die with it, you know.
Live with it or die
yeah.
with it, yeah.
But back to the MiGs, the very first mission up to Route Paxic I had was, I was a MiG-cap flight, and we got this warning call that, you know, an AWACS airplane with an airborne radar would give us warnings that, hey, there are MiGs airborne, and so we knew this guy was coming, but the MiGs are very short-legged. They don't have much range, and but so they stay pretty close to home. But anyway, this guy got up in the stratosphere. He was up way above us, and then he plugged his afterburner in and came. We were doing about 500, and he came through us like we were almost standing still. I mean, that MiG-21's a Mach 2 airplane also, and so he was well supersonic
and coming
and diving, and he passed right between us and our wingman, and hosed off a heat-seeking missile and that hit our lead. It didn't do any serious damage, but he looked like he got shot with a shotgun.
Oh, wow.
And I remember seeing that missile go through, and he was close enough I could see the color of his helmet, you know. It was like, wow. And my mouth was a little dry then. It was like, first time, it was like, you know. And then I tried getting a lock on. Our radar would not hold lock, so we missed our chance to get a MiG. And we didn't, the MiGs weren't always up. A lot of times, they had a really bad experience with Robin Olds, Colonel Olds, one day in January, and they set a trap for the MiGs. And we're good. We had a trap for the MiG, and they ended up shooting 7 of them down. So they got a little in one day, and so the MiGs got a little sheepish sometimes. And when we would be heading up, they would go up in China and hang out until we left. You know, so they wanted to preserve their hardware.
Let's take a break and return to our seats here.
Okay.
We're back, and we're going to finish up talking about the MiGs here.
Well, okay. Well, that's basically it on the MiGs. But the rest of that mission, this mission, it took about 3.5 hours to fly, and it's round trip. It was over 900 miles. 900
miles.
Yeah. And then after we'd hit the tanker again and refuel to get enough fuel to go home, and one of the things that we quite often did, we had a squadron of Aussies stationed there with us. They were on the other side of the base, and they flew F-86s, which replicated the performance of a MiG-17 pretty well. And they were there to protect our base from air attack, which was never happened. But one of the things they did was they would come up and bounce us, and we would dogfight, and it was good practice. And so we had a great rapport with these Aussies, and so we had a few Fosters and played a little cricket, and anyway.
Closest I got to a MiG was when I was at Taiwan Defense Command, the Republic of China and our government, and we planned for a defection from Communist China. Colonel Fang flew over in a MiG-19, and we had $100,000 in gold bricks, and I got called down there to inspect the aircraft, and it really didn't look very airworthy to me. The bolts and things, you know.
Yeah, they're kind of made like a locomotive. They're tractor. They're kind of a farm implement. They can operate out of grass strips, but they were durable, and they could be in the right hands. Could be a pretty good.
They could be good.
Pretty formidable little weapon.
Let's back off just a little bit and look at some of these photographs that led up to you being over there on missions into North Vietnam, and you could just describe the different photographs there.
Well, this first one here is this young guy. Resembles me. I guess that's,
How old were you there?
Well, that was 67. I was 25.
25.
Yeah, and standing in front of my hooch where we lived, and there was a cluster of these where the squadron was kind of domiciled in the same general area, and each building had 6 rooms and two people to a room, and then in the center was a day room and the showers and the head, and that's where we lived. And it was not a bad situation as far as the comfort goes. It was air conditioned. We had a houseboy that did our bed, did our laundry, did our shoes, and so we were pretty well pampered. And
you earned to be pampered because of the missions you were flying.
As long as, you know, it was kind of a strange existence in that, you know, you could have really good food at the officers club. That's where we took all our meals, and so we didn't really suffer in that regard at all. And as long as you made it home at night, you were golden. It was
you were
pretty
golden,
good.
yeah.
And oops. Well, this is me. That copy turned out a little dark, but standing in front of the airplane as I was getting ready to take off. But this other picture behind it actually shows the typical outfit that we went in, and you had quite a bit of gear with you. You have a survival vest and your G suit, which is important, and you carried a .38 for if you were down, and these pockets were your little survival radios if you were shot down. That was your only ticket home, and boy, you checked those babies out before you went out to the airplane, and you have extra pockets for spare batteries. And different first aid gear, and the main survival gear though was in the ejection seat, and that would go out with you and stuck with you. And then you had a harness, and the parachute was also part of the ejection seat, so you just snapped into the parachute and when you're in there. But when you get in this thing, you don't just fasten the seat belt. You put this thing on, you wear it. And you really cinch yourself down. Your legs are strapped on from 4 points to, it retracts your legs to keep you from flailing when you bail out in a high-speed situation, and then you're attached to other places, and your G-suit plugs into the pneumatic system of the airplane, and then you have your oxygen leads and all that. So the ground crew chief helps you get all set up and get ready to go. And this is our gang here. This is the 433rd at that time, and this is you probably won't be able to get in tight enough, but I'm here kind of in the middle of the pack here. And our squadron commander is right here in the front row. Tremendous professionalism in this group. He was a Air Force Thunderbirds flight lead, and he had another one of his Thunderbird wingmen was with us too, and so we really had some.
How many Korean veterans did you have in? Were they in Korea?
Well, the flight commanders generally had Korea experience. You know, like the guy I flew with flew 86s. Our our squadron commander that I mentioned was an ace from Korea.
One of the aviators, the Marine Corps, is very proud of is Ted Williams, who high batting average, and he fought in World War II. And then when he was called up to Korea, he went with the Marines and didn't bat an eye, and came back and set a batting record. I mean, so these guys have got great hand-eye coordination.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few other little photos and things that I can put up here. That this was a newspaper clipping out of our Fort Morgan, Colorado local paper, and it was kind of curious to me because it was a mission that was really not particularly noteworthy to us. One night we bombed a truck convoy going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The interesting thing about this to me is in the last paragraph where it says he was stationed overseas September 1, actually it was August, and had flown 61 missions before Christmas, but he has agreed to stay on to fly after I fly the 100 missions like it was. You know, what was that about? Well, that was because of the secret bombing campaigns that were going on in Laos, and nobody was talking about it. So it was just kind of a funny way to phrase that, I thought.
For that kind of information to get out, it wouldn't have gotten out in World War II. Somehow it got out in the press.
Yeah.
And we had situations when we were on the ground in Vietnam. Hanoi Jane would have names of our troops.
Oh, yeah.
And a wife back in the States would have a baby, and he wouldn't even know that it was a boy or a girl, and Hanoi Jane would come over with a lot of intelligence information.
Yeah.
And we would come back from the coast of Vietnam on on the Princeton aircraft carrier, and the troops are going to town. We were supposed to be there for 10 days of training and a little R&R, and the bar girls would say, "Oh, you're not going to be here 10 days. You're leaving in 3 days." Well, how they got that information, the bamboo telegraph, you know, and that's how that stuff gets out.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure they knew exactly when we took off and who was going.
Right.
But anyway, this is a picture of the of us refueling in the daytime, and remember we did this at night and in weather and all kinds of conditions. You get in there, and all four of you are on the wing of this tanker, and then you recycle through the boom one at a time, and it takes about 5 minutes or so to fill up at that point. And it was a kind of a touchy operation, but always came off pretty good.
I have
the
an Air
tankers
Force
were
friend
great.
who was a boom operator in the Iraq War, and he told me how they did that, and it's very, very precise. And the pilot has to keep the plane at a certain speed. And
well, it's a matter of not even moving the controls. It's almost a pressure that, you know, you just kind of, you wouldn't want to sneeze, put it that way. But anyway, that was refueling. And then backing up to this mission, here's a picture of a surface-to-air missile.
Let me hold that there and see if we can.
But I don't know if you can get in tight enough on this.
Right there.
But
we'll hold it.
this is the delta of Hanoi that as you go in, and this is the flame of the SAM, and there are two F-4s up here in the in the upper corner by your hand.
Yeah.
And they're just starting to do the evasive maneuver. You can see them.
Do you know about where the Hanoi Hilton would be?
Well, you know, when we pulled off of that bridge thing, we about went right over it.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we kind of felt kind of good about that to let our buddies know that we're around and we haven't forgotten them.
Yeah.
Because you know.
But this was the flying telephone pole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is an artist's depiction of that Doomer Bridge mission that I came up with, and this is an F-105 coming off of it, and the bridge being down here. They depicted the flak there, but the flak in reality was several times thicker. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. It was just awesome. It was said somewhere I read recently they had like 8,000 anti-aircraft guns in North Vietnam. They weren't all there, but it seemed like it at the time. But anyway. Well,
you did a year there in on your first tour, 138. Were you ever sent back for any upgrade training?
Well, yeah. Towards the end of the tour, you start getting your next assignment down, and I wanted to upgrade to the front seat. I can back up a little bit. They did start a short-lived upgrade program for us in theater there, and we thought it was due to the commanding general had a son who was in the back seat, and we think he kind of coerced Dad to start up this program, and so it was done with. It was a shortcut to training, and it didn't work out very well. In fact, the general lost his son doing it too.
Gosh.
And they halted that after they lost about 15 airplanes in a row.
Well, as they built up their air defenses, you had to change the technology for the aircraft, modify the radar or some of the...
Yeah. Well, back up to what you were talking about, the assignment came down to upgrade, and I went off to California, to the same place I went through, and the Southern California is our playground, like kind of in the Top Gun movie, you know.
I've been George Air Force Base.
George Air Force Base in Victorville. It was a high desert. Oh, it was fun in the summer there, and
we were at 29 Palms, just east of that.
We used to go down there and drop dumb bombs on that, inert bombs on that range. But so that's where we went through upgrade, and then right back to the same squadron.
Were you ordered or did you volunteer?
Well, you had to be technically a volunteer to even let you into the upgrade course, because they
so
wanted
it was
to,
assumed that,
you know, so, but at the time they said, oh, but, you know, it's a technicality, you won't go until everybody else has gone once.
right.
And about halfway through the program, they changed their mind and said, oh, by the way, you're going back. And so it was kind of a surprise, but that's what we signed up for.
Right, and you know, the bonding that you have with your fellow officers, you probably hooked up with some of them that had been there in the 433rd before.
Sure, yeah. In fact, I roomed with one of the guys, and we were close buddies the whole time. And we rented a house in Wrightwood, which is off in the mountains by San Bernardino.
I know where that is.
And the reason I did it was because there was a ski area there.
I used to ski up there.
Did you? Well, it didn't snow until the final weekend I lived there. We left in January, and it was like no snow until almost got snowed in, and then it couldn't ski. But anyway.
Yeah. So you're back at Ubon, and you're flying the same type of missions that you were before.
Well, basically,
initially.
But the RUPAC 6, they had initiated a bombing halt in the latter part of my first tour.
Yeah, November 1968.
Yeah, and well, no, and it was in the spring of '68. Yeah, and anyway, so and the total bombing halt in North Vietnam was in effect by the time I got back. So we were kind of relegated at that point to the barrel roll Steel Tiger type missions, and we did a lot of the barrel roll, and this is an area of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. When you hear the word trail, it sounds like a little footpath or something, but it was a network. I mean, a network of roads that were cut in there, and the main road would be cut, and they would use a bulldozer and cut another detour, and they would cut another one, and they would cut another one, so you could never choke it off.
I saw them coming in photos on bicycles, loaded down with bringing the gear down the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
And you could never spot them. And these aren't roads that are out in the open for the most part. They're under a triple canopy of 150-foot jungle, you know, and so it was really hard to find. Traffic never moved in the daytime, hardly ever. So we were just kind of relegated to try to cut the roads, trying to impede the flow of traffic and material going down there. And the frustrating thing about it was, you know, here you are you guys are down there trying to do something and win your part of the war, and you give free passage all the way from China to all the materials and troops all the way down to the DMZ. And without, you know, so that bombing pause really hurt a lot of people.
It didn't help us at all.
No, and it enabled the North Vietnamese to bring all those 8,000 guns further down.
Right.
You know?
What best we could do is run B-52 strikes on Khe Sanh right about there.
Yeah. I did two missions, or no, I guess it was 3 on Khe Sanh, close air support when that was under siege. It was like LAX. There were so many airplanes, they just cycled things through there one after another.
So you're flying these barrel roll and Steel Tiger missions, and then was there any opportunity to do something more unique and
different?
Exciting?
Well, a couple things. Let me back into my patches are a fighter pilot thing, and I this is one I kind of got a kick out of.
It's Ski Magua Pass.
Ski Magua Pass, yeah.
It's 5,300 feet elevation, 100 exciting trails, North Vietnam, and it looks like ski poles. Are those?
No,
what are those?
Well, it looks like ski poles, but it's actually supposed to be anti-aircraft tracers going up and the burst going down. But anyway, so skiing was kind of always in the back of my mind too.
What I've gotten to know, you know, skiing has always been a part of your life. We'll get to that in a little bit, but there's part of it right there. Yeah.
Well, anyway, didn't have much chance to ski those days.
No.
But one thing that we got into that was interesting, and a lot of people might not know, is our squadron became the first one to employ smart bombs, which is kind of an oxymoron kind of thing, but it was the first implementation of laser-guided weaponry, which we're now seeing used extensively in more highly developed systems. But we were the first to use those, and it was an interesting process, and they were really impressive. I mean, we had at one point we had like a 10-foot average miss distance with those things. Initially we had a problem with the things going, the fusing not working right, and we had some duds. One day I was circling a bridge. There's one aircraft that had the laser illuminator, and he would circle a target, and then the other aircraft would go in one at a time and drop the seeking bomb. And anyway, we were illuminating a bridge under the control of this Laotian advisor, and waiting for the explosion, and it didn't go, and it didn't go, and then the bridge fell down. The bomb was so accurate that it was like a 1,000-pound sledgehammer, and knocked the bridge down without going off.
They'd have a sense of false
they were that accurate, and
go in and repair it.
Yeah, and now we're kind of used to seeing that kind of thing in the Gulf Wars and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you mentioned to me in Libya that the British NATO forces were using a similar weapon to what you described.
In the first Gulf War, they were. I think I could hear the conversation on TV, and the coordination that they were using was the same. They were probably using the same hardware they got it from us. You know? Yeah.
Well, so you're still there on your second tour there at Ubon, and you've been flying all these, like I say, the barrel roll and the Steel Tigers. And was there any other mission that you started flying then?
Well, towards the middle part, towards the latter third of my tour, which was a year at that point, I was offered there was a sub-unit located there at the base. It was a fast FAC program, fast forward air controller, and as you mentioned, you had the prop forward air controllers, and by this time they had so much anti-aircraft hardware down in that area, they were just getting hammered, the prop planes. So we went in as a fast mover, the fast FAC did, and had a little better chance of survival against that sort of thing. So this program was initiated in South Vietnam, actually, and I have a book, really an interesting read if you get a chance to.
It's Bury Us Upside Down, The Misty Pilots and Secret Battle for the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the title comes from kind of a toast that you have to kind of feature yourself in the bar with a bunch of guys that maybe lost a buddy that day or something, and the toast is, or the saying goes, when my days are over and my flying days are past, you can bury me upside down and the world can kiss my anyway. But anyway, they had tremendous expertise in that organization too. It was an elite, kind of like the Army has their Rangers and the Navy has their SEALs, and
we have recon.
Yeah, recon, and so a fast FAC was a hand-selected group of about 6 air crews at a time. And we had this mission of being a forward air controller to find targets and to mark them, because the rules of engagement at that time was that all strike aircraft had to be under the control of a forward air controller. There was no freelancing like there used to be in the first earlier years of the war. And in September of '69, I arrived in January '69, and in September I was called into the squadron commander's office, and he said, we'd like to have you consider being a Wolf FAC, and that was the call sign of this organization at our base. So it took a little thinking, because it was a fairly hazardous mission. It had about a 30% loss rate. We were the typical strike pilot. The rule was one pass and haul out, one pass and go home. Release them all and don't hang around. Well, the Wolf-Vac was equipped with 2 rocket pods, one under each wing, with 7 individual rockets that you fired off one at a time, and a Gatling gun that was slung under your center line, and which was a tremendous piece of hardware that put out 6,000 rounds a minute of 20 millimeter high explosive, and so you could cover quite a bit of territory with that. But the fast FAC would go out and use these rockets to mark targets individually. So on some missions, I made 14 passes.
Would you go out ahead of the flight to do the
well,
recon?
we'd go out on our own, yeah.
On your own.
Everybody else went in daytime. You always went out in a 4-ship. At night, it was always 2-ship. But the Wolf-Vacs, we were lone wolves. Yeah.
Lone wolf, yeah.
And so our area of responsibility was this midsection of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we would go out. Well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, so this buddy of mine he was in another squadron, and he was offered a Wolf-Vac position the same time, and we kind of chided each other, you know, do you want to do it? Yeah, okay, I'll do it, you know, and so we both did it and accepted that, and I got a week's leave before I started this thing, and he went right into it and stayed there, and so anyway, I went home and didn't tell my folks what I was up to, and anyway, I went home and ended up getting engaged.
Your bachelor at that time?
Bachelor days were over. I didn't tell
Yeah.
Karen what I was up to.
Right. Well, anyway, as Colonel Mark Brandt, I'd like to read. I know that I feel comfortable reading this because it describes you from what I've gotten to know you, and it just talks about the fact is invariably they are the loner type who likes to mix it up, get down the weeds and find the enemy, then challenge him to come out and fight. But like their slow-moving brethren, they must have maturity to mix prudence with daring, to differentiate between courage and recklessness. They must have a fast eye, memory for detail, ability to control several flights of fighters at once, and an intimate knowledge of every rock, bush, gun, bypass, truck park, and trail over hundreds of square miles. You're traveling so fast, so you have a large geographical area.
It was a continually changing thing, yeah.
Yeah. They must know location, height of the Black Rock Karst, that's the hills, and be intimately familiar with where the guns are, when they like to shoot, and what positions look promising for new sites. They are the fast movers, the jet facts, who along with the slow movers fly the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We talked about that. The men must also be in damn good physical shape to take the 4 and 5 hour trail sniffing missions. They twist and turn, dive and zoom, always pulling G's. Jinking. What's jinking?
It's kind of like broken field running as a football receiver would do, and you just have to constantly be loading the airplane up and changing the trajectory that you're going. You have to spoil the tracking of the ground fire, because you could just count on being tracers going across your bow, and I mean there were days you lose count, but you know there were quite a few days where you'd pick up 1,000 rounds. And,
heads constantly swiveling as they cut back and forth over the trails, around the karst, and through the passes at 400 to 500 knots. Don't think they can't see things during the maneuvers at those speeds. One wolf saw a bush out of place, just an ordinary run-of-the-mill bush among hundreds by the alligator Dan Cry. He chandelled up, rolled in to check it out, and found his gun sight square on a camouflage command car. Scratch one command car, not the two-eyes driver. That kind of perception is common among all the facts, fast or slow. And in other ways, too, the facts are fairly representative of the fast movers. For one thing, I know half of them were bachelors.
Yeah.
You were a bachelor.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And it says something right there. For another, all were top-rated officers who most assuredly had minds of their own. Papa Wolf didn't have to lead this kind of pack. Who's Papa Wolf?
Well, that was the writer of that. He was, in this case, he was the senior element of the operation,
And it says here that he'd be older, but it says Papa Wolf sometimes had to lope like hell to stay up with you guys.
yeah, that's true.
So anyway, that was really interesting to me to read that.
One point of being able to, you had to be kind of a detective on this stuff because there weren't trucks out in the open. It was under the you know, they'd park it in places and you'd have to hunt and peck, and it was a trial and error thing. Sometimes you came up dry and sometimes you didn't. One time I was up here near Magia Pass and I saw what looked like a lot of truck tire tracks in the dirt pulling off into the bush. And I said, something's going on there. There was just too much evidence of vehicular movement there. And so I called up the airborne command post that funnels in your bombing flights that you're directing. So anyway, I got a flight of Navy F-4s to come in, and I marked this area for them, and I said, let's try and see what we come up with. And we came up with probably one of the biggest secondary explosions I've ever seen. And anyway, they called in for photos of the thing and wanted to. The thing, you know, it was hundreds of feet above the trees and explosions going off for an hour.
Well, would you coordinate with Task Force 77 to get the Navy in on your mission?
There was an airborne command post. It was a C-130 that would be circling over Thailand and in a safe area, and they had radio communications with that element, and they would. You would communicate with them what your target was, and they would see what ordnance is available and what was coming in when, and they would funnel it to you from that.
How about the accuracy of the maps? Did you have GPS at that point?
No, that wasn't part of the deal. We had a system called inertial navigation. It was a series of gyros, and it was a very primitive system compared to what you have today. It was notoriously, you know, suspect. You know, when it was on, it was okay, but you know, it would start driving off, and then you could, you know, and you would be 10 miles off easily. You know?
I was on one operation. We flew in from the aircraft carrier, and we relied on French maps, and we had the coordinates for the helicopter pilots to put us down, and I had my artillery battery, and there was an island out in the river, and we had a Marine company there, and they were coming, the Viet Cong, to that company. And I didn't have a chance to register, and all I could rely on was the coordinates on the French map here and the island coordinates, and I fired for effect, and it was right on the target. I mean, it's amazing how we carried out some of our missions. It was, like you mentioned, some of the things were not as sophisticated then as they are now.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
You know,
the maps were okay. You know, we had a much better scale map than this sort of thing. We got down to the nitty gritty on that, but it was the maps were not particularly an issue as far as that goes.
Well, by the end of that second tour,
before we
go ahead.
get to that,
we don't want to end that.
Yeah, one of the more poignant memories I have is I was sitting in the arming area ready to take off, it's at the end of the runway where aircraft go in, and ground crews make one final safety check of the aircraft, you make sure nothing's leaking, no tires are cut, and then if you're carrying bombs or whatever, they pull the safety pins on whatever weaponry you have. Well, anyway, I pulled in to the arming area right next to my roommate, and we went through the process and looking over. It was a nice, fine late afternoon, and we exchanged a crisp salute as his canopy went down, and he was a Wolf 02, and he took off right ahead of me, and I still have this vision of him, his contrail disappearing off into the distance, and I was the last one to see him alive. And he was talking to the airborne command post, and all of a sudden his sentence just ended cut short, and he's never been found. And anyway, we kind of go on about your business, but I was here in Aspen and picked up the Time magazine in 1994, and here's his picture.
There's his picture.
There was an article about Americans Left Behind, and they were speculating, and there had been reports that he might have been a POW left behind. It turned out to be a false lead, I think, but wonderful guy, sharp as they come, and another really heartbreaking aspect of it was
top flight, handsome young man.
Yeah, he was a major at the time, and he was from Florida. But the backseater that he was supposed to fly with was sick, and at the last minute, this one fella, young fella, popped up, and he said, "I'll take it." And the guy had already finished his missions. He'd already finished his tour. His bags were packed to go home. We had said goodbye to him. He said, "I'll take one more," and it didn't work.
I was doing the Veterans Day. You were there, and I think there were about 948 killed on their first day in Vietnam, and 1,400 on their last day. I mean, you're all packed, and you've done a whole tour, and you don't make it. And as a matter of fact, today there's officially 5,200 missing and unaccounted for from Vietnam.
Got a lighter story along a similar line. We had, whenever you finished your tour, we'd have a dinner and roast the guy who was leaving, and we had, for that occasion, we had a special flight suit. It was called a party suit, which was a gaudish color, and ours were always kind of a green color, you know, not camouflage but green. And anyway, we had this one Wolfpack who was kind of a rambunctious young guy and ended up being a general later. But anyway, he had quite a spirit. But anyway, he had a special flight suit made up that was purple, and with bell bottoms of the day, and he was going to wear that on his last flight. And the wing commander caught him going out to the airplane with that on. He said, "Go back in there and get it changed." Well, he ended up getting shot down.
He did.
Can you imagine trying to hide out in the in the jungle in purple bell bottoms?
Yeah, in the bell bottoms. That was the era of hair.
Yeah,
at that time. I remember.
Well, he got picked up, but anyway, that was kind of a.
Yeah, that was something else.
Well, let's see. Here's a little piece of paper I can show you. It's not. It's worth the paper it's printed on. It's just kind of a humorous thing, actually.
Let's hold that up here.
It took me by surprise. It actually came to me after I'd finished my tour, but it was signed by the commander of 7th Air Force down in Saigon, and never heard of this thing. But anyway, they presented me with this official-looking certificate for the Dozo Club. Well, nobody had ever heard of it. It doesn't really exist other than on this paper, but. You know, everybody wanted to shoot down 5 MiGs so you could be an ace. Well, that wasn't an option we had because of the way the thing was being run.
Right.
So one of the, I don't know who was keeping track of this, but somebody down in Saigon kept track that I had destroyed 5 bulldozers, which were a high-value target.
Dozer.
So Dozo, it's an eagle picking up a bulldozer.
Oh yeah, there it is.
But back on bulldozers and such, we were trying to impede the flow of traffic down the trail, and they used bulldozers and shovels and picks and everything. And one day we slid a section of the road and closed it late afternoon. It would have been the equivalent of the entire Shale Bluff sliding down onto 82, if I can give you that analogy.
Yeah.
And the idea was, okay, let's see what happens. And I was up there the next morning, not hardly 12 hours later, and you could not tell
next morning
that had happened, and they were that efficient in keeping those roads going. So bulldozers were important to them. But so CDOT could maybe.
Well, where I was at Dong Ha with the 3rd Marine Division, our impression was that you guys would bomb during the day, and then they would fix the roads at night. And
Yeah.
you did nighttime missions too.
Yeah, they were.
On the
It
Ho
was
Chi
a
Minh
24-hour a day
Yeah,
operation.
yeah.
Yeah, I did a number a night, which had its own hazards. Vertigo being one. It was darker than the ace of spades out there. It was really black. Now this is a mission that I was on that was quite memorable. It was I was working the midsection there and one afternoon and got a call from the Airborne Command Post that they needed help up the road, that a F4 had just gone down. And so he was working with a O2 forward air controller, and it was a F4 out of Cameron Bay, which they usually didn't come that far north, you know. But anyway, they were there, and they got hit on the roll-in on this choke point there. And this started the beginning of the longest, or the biggest air rescue attempt in Air Force history. And it lasted over 3 days, 51 hours. The guy was on the ground, and it involved over 336 sorties, 10 helicopters, Jolly Greens, which is a large rescue helicopter that comes bristling with guns and a hoist to bring you out of there. 10 of them got shot up on the attempts. They had to make like 16 attempts before they could, before the area was softened up enough to get them out. And anyway, he was the coolest cat. Boy, he kept his head in this whole thing. I ended up flying 15 hours, 7.5 hours that day. And I was used not too much. I just played a small role in this thing.
I believe you mentioned, underlined in that article there.
It was. They started sending other support aircraft in to soften up the targets because they knew generally where these 2 crewmen were down, and so they would bring it in and set up a flak trap for the things that were going to come, and so it became just a battle royal and for life and death, and they made, I think, like 7 attempts to pick him up the first day. And he was well hidden in a riverbank. This was absolutely the worst area that you could possibly be down in, because it was a choke point where it had been bombed for years, and there were caves that they had hospitals in there. They had hundreds of meters of caves that they would set up guns in them, and people lived in those things. In fact, it was interesting. In kind of looking at things online, there is now a motorcycle tour of that section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they go into some of these caves, so you can see video of these caves that we were dealing with, and people would go in there and be safe from attack.
Those caves were very sophisticated. Up on the DMZ, we captured a field hospital. They had nurses and surgeons in uniforms, and beds and antiseptic and all that. But on Lieutenant, I read the article. It said that he moved positions across the river, finally got onto a kind of a rose bush in the middle of the river, and the strikes knew that he was there and didn't hit where he was.
Well, at one point he said, a truck has just pulled up, not 50 yards from me, full of soldiers. And it was reported that there were like between 500 and 1,000 troops down in that area. And they were looking for him too. The front seater ended up on the other side of the river from him, and he hid out for a day. But the next morning, I don't know if I can
Here it is, right here.
Read the narrative of it. But anyway, he said that he heard excited voices, and then a long automatic weapons burst, and nothing more was ever heard from him. You know, so we knew that was one thing that we all knew, is they didn't take prisoners in Laos. That was, you know, in Vietnam you had a chance of going to the Hanoi Hilton, but in Laos.
Well, I think Lieutenant Bergeron's last line there, you had mentioned the importance of having radio and batteries, and he mentions that to survive, he said, you you want to have a good radio.
Yeah.
available.
And anyway, he was at one point they were within 25 feet of him, and the rescue forces beat him back. It was just an incredible battle. I mean, the last pickup attempt I was holding overhead, and you could see the helicopter came in to hover within 6 feet of him, and couldn't get him. But the tracers were coming out of that cave, and the tracers were coming down out of the helicopter, and it was like a water fight.
Bird had to get out of
going.
there. Yeah.
It was intense, and he had to get out. He couldn't. He was within 6 feet of the guy, and he was taking really bad hits, and one of the door gunners got killed in that, and anyway, so the interesting thing I have learned due to the power of the internet is I never knew this guy, but this was the front seater, Ben Danielson, and he was from Minnesota. And just last week I saw his memorial service on the internet, on YouTube, and the whole thing. So it kind of brought that whole thing full circle, closure on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, this backseater, Bergeron, was, as I said, he was pretty cool. I was the first one on the scene the pickup day, and in this article it says Lieutenant Bergeron heard an F-4 streak across the area several times. At first he thought it was a surveillance plane, but then figured the pilot wanted him up on the radio. So he picked up his radio and he said, "Good morning." And and that was to me. And he said, so the Phantom pilot informed him of the plans for the day, and then the pickup went ahead. And since this, I've had email exchanges with the guy, and he said thank you. And
with Bergeron?
Yeah, he's a CPA down in Georgia now.
Oh my gosh!
He said, "My kids thank you." And I mean, I'm not saying I did a big role in it, but I did do a few strafing passes right over the top of him down at tree level, and anyway, it was a team effort that unfortunately didn't get everybody, but got one guy out, and I went back to the States, and a few months later when I was in Germany, I ran into another F-4 pilot that I knew from over there, and he took my Wolf 06 position, and he got shot down in about 2 months after that in just about the same area, and almost had an identical experience. He was badly burned in it, but he got picked up, and his backseater was killed, was shot. But anyway, back onto the Danielson thing, how he came to be buried finally was his body was well, some of his personal effects showed up. His .38 pistol and his dog tags showed up in a Hanoi museum. And somebody, the working started going through, and eventually a recovery team went there and dug it out. And the recovery team was led by Danielson's son, who is now a Navy pilot. I mean, that's like a movie. I mean, that was like,
serendipity.
And so he escorted his dad's remains home 40 years later.
Story.
Yeah.
They're still over there. That center in Hawaii is working remains, all that we can find. We can get. There's 8,000 unaccounted for in Korea, and we can't go into North Korea. They won't help us. They're still there from the Korean War. Well, anyway, let's go on. You want to talk some more about this second tour?
Well, I made it through, and It was a kind of a lousy part of the war, but it was the most satisfying part for me, as far as being able to have the autonomy to freelance and to do your own thing.
Right. When you finished, you had 310 total missions. 1 Silver Star and a Distinguished Flying Cross and 3 Oak Leaf Clusters. And how many air medals? 24?
I think 25 is the last one.
25 air medals.
Those were kind of a function of numbers of missions. It wasn't.
In my readings, and you're talking about F-105s, but this is probably close to you. It said that odds against completing 100 missions range from impossible to very high. Now that's in a different aircraft, but still, those figures I think would apply.
Yeah. Those were
somewhat.
F-105 figures.
105s.
When they would go in low altitude in the 1965, 66, 67 time frame, and they didn't have electronic countermeasures available to them, and they were low altitude, and they took tremendous poundings.
Tremendous.
Yeah, they lost. I think one of the F-105 bases lost like 30 in one month. You know, but so that's they started almost running out of 105s, and that's when we started picking up more of the bombing missions.
Yeah. Can we take a look at the aircraft right here, the F4, and where'd you get that? And it looks.
This model I got when we were in the Philippines. Yeah.
I was there
so
2
it's
years.
been around a while.
Monkey pod, wood, or
It's a tremendous airplane. It was very reliable. The ground crews just did a heck of a job. The crew chiefs on these airplanes, they treated them like they were their own. And the thing is a beast. It's you get to very comfortable with it when you're flying it that much, and in training you learn to operate it on its edge of its envelope and really maximize the efficiency of it. You had to be careful; it could bite you.
yeah.
But it was just a wonderful airplane, capable of speeds of Mach 2.4s. Like the only time you did those speeds was on a training or I flew some FCF functional check flights when the airplane would have a engine change or something, and it would need to be checked out by an experienced pilot, and you'd run it through its paces, and it would typically not have external tanks, so it was what we'd call a clean bird, and part of the profile you flew was to go top speed, see how fast it would go.
Yeah.
And you were going 1,400 miles an hour, and at 45,000 feet, and the ground is going by you like highway signs.
Just look at it on the ground. Robin Olds, and when I look at this, he describes the F4 like a brooding hen. She squats half asleep over her clutch of eggs. Her tail feathers droop and her beak juts out forward belligerently. Her back looks humped and her wings tip splay upward. You see that right there. Sitting there, she is not a thing of beauty, far from it. But she is my F4, and her nest is a steel revetment. Her egg, 6 M117 750-pound bombs. This avian has fangs, very unbirdlike. They nestle under her belly and cling to her wings. She is ready to go, and so am I. A surge of juice and a blast of compressed air, and she came alive. We are as one, tied together, this machine an extension of the man. Her hydraulics, my muscles. Her sensors, my eyes. Her mighty engines, my power. I think it's a pretty
that's really
descriptive,
well,
of the F4.
You really, it is part of you. You love that machine, and it's really becomes part of your being, and you can make it. You don't, like I say, you don't just get in it. You wear it, and it does your bidding, and you've got to handle it right.
So the second tour
anyway.
came to an end, and you're a bachelor, doing all this wild stuff, and you rotated to CONUS, to Continental United
Well, just
States.
passing through.
Just passing. Tell us about passing through.
Well, my next assignment was actually to Germany, and
Hi, Karen.
speaking of the topic here, my wife just walked in. Anyway, Karen, and. As I was accepting the Wolf Fact position, I got this R&R back to the States, so I went back to say hello to my folks and my sister, and so I was I only had a week there, and including travel time, so it was just a few days that we were there, and Karen and I had gone together in high school a little bit and a little bit in college, but life took us separate directions for a number of years. And she came up here, and she was kind of a ski bumming thing, and
Up in
doing that.
Aspen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was working the Red Onion skier chalet and the buttermilk hostess thing.
I saw a photo of her the other day.
Oh, here,
of
here
that
it is.
one.
Yeah.
Just put that one up. Here we are.
Here's our snow bunny at Buttermilk.
The early day
When was that,
ambassadors.
63, I think?
The early day ambassadors here, here's Karen.
And
Great photo,
and
Karen.
the old black
Yeah.
head skis and
Yeah, the
probably
head
one of
standards.
look at that old quilted
Yeah, the
parka.
head standards.
Yeah. So anyway, she had gone off and was doing her thing, and she was working at DU at the time, and that I was back on R&R. This was after her little gig up here for a couple years, and anyway, I was home last night, just kind of getting ready to mentally get back into it, and the phone rang, and it was this mutual friend, a friend of Karen's. She called and she said, "Did you know Karen's in town?" I said, "No, I didn't." And well, make a long story short, we got together that night and got engaged. We hadn't, and I hadn't seen her since, what was it, about
Wow.
5 years.
Wow.
You know, and but I was used to making fast decisions, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, you mentioned about the
That was
facts
40.
making.
That was 42 years ago, almost. Yeah.
Wonderful. It
And
turned
yeah,
out.
we've had a.
So
stay
you got,
with
where'd you get married?
So then, well, we got married at DU.
At
She,
DU.
she was working for the dean there, and
Oh, yeah.
so, and as I said, we were kind of en route to my new assignment, and they didn't have base housing available. It was kind of a crunch time there, so I had to leave Karen behind after a honeymoon in Vail. Sorry
Yeah.
about that, but that's what
Back
we did.
into the skiing.
We just did a quick deal there at in Vail, and after we got married, I mean, I went back to. I left that out. I went back and finished my Wolf Fact days, and that was before emails and telephone connections. So she was, it was a leap of faith for her, because here one night and I'm gone, she's doing the wedding planning, and the next time I show up, it was just a couple days before the wedding rehearsal.
And she's the
She was hoping
secretary
I'd
to
show up, you know.
secretary to the president of DU. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
pretty went position. Well, you went to what, Bitburg, Germany?
Yeah, that was our next stop, and I went on ahead and had to leave Karen behind because there was no housing for about a month or so, and picked up as just a squadron pilot there in
What was
Bitburg.
what was the mission of the
Well,
squadron?
the mission, it was part of the Cold War, basically. We were nuclear deterrent was the main thing, but NATO, it was a part of NATO. USAF
NATO.
was a part of NATO, and we were called on to do joint exercises with the Germans, for instance, and the French, not the French, but the British. And so we had a little interchange with those organizations too, and we pulled a lot of temporary duty to southern parts of Europe. We would go for months at a time to Spain. We would go to Aviano, Italy.
Aviano, yeah.
You know that, and which is not far from Bosnia, and that's where all
Right.
the Bosnian air support came from, and Turkey and Sardinia, and so we spent a lot of time down there. One reason was because the weather was better, and there were practice bombing ranges down there, and you could practice your skills down there.
Yeah, I've been spending a fair amount of time in Italy recently, down at Sigonella, down in the tip of Italy, Sicily, where we were, and I talked to the officers there, and they were telling me about the missions going out of Sigonella, NATO missions, 24/7, and it was quite intensive.
Yeah. Oh, I've got to tell you another ski-related little story. When we go down there, you could hardly get an overnight bag in the, you couldn't get an overnight bag in the cockpit. So they would hang an old napalm, an empty napalm canister under the wing that had a door on it, and that was your luggage pod. Well, we had one modified to cut off the front end to become a ski rack.
A ski rack.
So we would take our skis down, and then on the weekend you could ski we'd ski the Pyrenees or out of Aviano.
Yeah, out of Aviano there.
A little bit.
Did Karen get to go on some of these trips, like to Florence, or?
Well,
you had time off to travel.
Yeah, it was fun. It was also a great time to travel. We got to bond with I've got a lot of relatives in northern part of Germany still, uncles and aunts and cousins, and so we got to know them and practice my German. And
so this coming back from when you were raised in Fort Morgan, and your father spoke German, and so that you could
well, we had
speak that language.
Yeah, I didn't cover that, but when we went as a family to Germany in 1950. It was the first time after the war, and visited grandparents, and we stayed there for basically the summers. And so my sister and I were playing with our cousins. We picked up the language pretty readily.
Yeah.
So anyway, we didn't have really a chance to use it much until back in Bitburg, and also actually here in Aspen in our later lodging days. We had a lot of German visitors.
Well, you know, looking at your combat record and everything, in the Marine Corps as a commander, I would certainly encourage you to extend and make a career out of the Air Force. But you, what were the circumstances that you left the Air Force because of a distinguished combat record?
Well, being a fighter pilot is a hard act to follow, and one day the squadron commander brought everybody in. He said, you know, there's going to be a major cutback coming down the road, and so most of you, particularly you older guys, are not going to be flying anymore. If I'd been if I'd been given some inkling, you know, that was, you know, that I could continue to do that. Of course, not everybody was cut out of the pattern on that, but it certainly didn't look too encouraging. And we had other reasons to be back in Colorado. We had some family holdings. My dad was getting up in years. He must be about my age now. And so we had some business ideas, and so we thought we'd really like to be back in Colorado. And you know, we missed the mountains.
And so that was always in the back of your mind. And you have two children, a daughter Allison and a son Matt. Where were they born and raised?
Well, Allison was born when we were still over there in Bitburg.
Oh,
yeah. So, but that was not even a year into our separation at that point from the Air Force. And then our son, when we came back to Colorado, we ended up settling for a while in Fort Collins, which we're familiar with, and loved that town, and went, you know, going to school there and everything, and did a little real estate investing and sales there. But on the weekends we'd always kind of gravitate up here to Aspen,
and so it pulled on you.
It pulled on us so much that we finally decided we weren't going to leave. And so we got out in '73, and our son was born in Fort Collins, by the way, in '74. And then we would come up here several times and scratch your heads, what would we do, and so forth. And we finally ended up scraping the resources together and bought a lodge.
What lodge was that?
Innsbruck Inn on Main Street in 2nd.
How many years were you in that?
Oh yeah, we were there for 23 years.
23 years.
Yeah. Wow. We kept it so long that we ascertained that the kids really didn't want to follow us into it, and they wanted to do their own life, and that was okay too. And we had a good run. First year was a little rough. It was '76, and no snow year. You remember that?
I was in Taiwan then. I read about it.
No snow making, and you could mow the lawn till February 21.
That's a tough year to get into the business.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, let's talk a little bit about this one here.
We got ahead of ourselves a little bit in that. Don't want to brag, just let the plaque speak for itself, I guess. There was a competition, an ongoing competition. This isn't the same as the movie, but it was a sought-after prize, and it was a 6-month competition in the squadron, and I ended up getting the Top Gun award.
That was in Germany? In
Germany, yeah.
And where were the ranges that you flew over?
Well, all over. There was one. It depends on the type of delivery. From Holland to there was one just north of Munich, and other than that, down in Spain, and there was one right out of just real close to Aviano there in Italy.
What's interesting, and I've been reading a little bit about some of your letters to the editor down in Holloman Air Force Base. There's German pilots down there training in low-level flights, and I've been involved with land use in California with the Marines training on federal lands, and we were taking the H-34 helicopter, and it couldn't carry loads at 10,000 feet, and then we developed the 46 and the 53s and the Jolly Green Giant. And in order to do that, we had to, lease land from the Forest Service. And I know that to train the B-52 pilots and to train the helicopter pilots, we need to, and with missions in Afghanistan, we have to be able to operate at high altitudes and low altitudes. And there's an issue going on right now about low-level flights over public lands. And could you just, I'm all for it because I know that we have to train. Your premise on writing that letter about the training, the importance of it,
well,
in peacetime.
Basically, I think the county commissioners were rightly being cautious about letting overflights go on over rural areas. The flights aren't really proposed to go over congested areas, but the impact on the wildlife and campers and hikers and that sort of thing, and the effects of it, and these, the Air Force is proposing to do, I think, like 3 flights a day over a large area. I mean, it's not like it's going to be a high density operation, but at pretty low altitudes at times. And they have night vision equipment now, which we never had, which is, I mean, it's amazing, the stuff you can see at night now. But as you were alluding to, the operations that we're asking our young men to do, and women to do in Afghanistan and who knows wherever else in the future, involves a lot of hot and high terrain. And aircraft, and particularly helicopters, and one of the aircraft that they want to use is an Osprey, which is a hybrid between a helicopter and a...
We use that in the Marine Corps.
They are pretty noisy, but anyway, they've improved their safety record. They were a little bit, had problems initially, as a lot of airplanes do.
They did in Arizona.
But that's kind of somewhat behind them. But my point was that training to be valuable has to be realistic. And a lot of these young guys going in to fly these missions don't most likely have any high altitude experience. And an airplane, particularly helicopter, an Osprey I can see too, just does not handle the same as here as at sea level. It's a density altitude thing, and just more oxygen molecules to beat against the moving propellers and so forth. And so my point is that I would, if it was my son riding in the back of one of these, I would want to have that pilot trained to the degree of realism that is called for, because they're going to have 20 plus bodies in the back of that, and that's no time to start learning what it's like. And these missions are going to go on somewhere, and wildlife is going to be impacted a bit. I think wildlife is also resilient too.
Well, they are.
I've got a friend just sent me pictures of the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep right on the road up the Frying Pan. It's not.
You see them. I see them up there.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not to belittle the protection that the county commissioners want to give, but I think there's got to be a balance, and I think it's important.
And I've been down at the Goldwater bombing range in Arizona, and they come in from the east to the west with dummy bombs, and the wildlife on the 2/3 on the eastern side is the most abundant in the state of Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
So the military isn't destroying any. Along those lines, to be trained to go into high altitudes, where I used to teach mountain operations in California in the Sierras, we still have 20 mules there that we have our battalions going through there and training at high altitude. And we're teaching them how to throw diamond hitches on those mules, so when they get to Afghanistan, they can pack up on the trails up there, because we don't have machinery that'll go there. Well, anyway, let's get back a little bit to Aspen here. The fact that you had the German background in running the Innsbruck, that's Austrian name. Did you have any contact with any German people that would come here?
Well, quite a bit actually. We ended up tying into a couple of German tour operators, and we got quite a bit of business there. And we had a couple of managers' girls that were German and had their visas, and were instrumental in kind of bringing that whole business to life. So we did get quite a bit of international business, and Brits too. A lot of British folks. Yeah. Great. Had some really good times and skied with them.
It's been a good role.
Yeah.
Since you got out of the Air Force, did you have any reserve requirements to
No,
meet?
I didn't. No, I didn't. I looked into it a little bit, but it didn't really fit our plans too much. For one, well, they didn't really have any slots open, they said, and it would have entailed a lot of back and forth to Buckley and so forth anyway, and the lodge was a pretty full-time task. Anyway.
Have you done any civilian flying since you got out?
Well, it took me a while to get interested in it. As I said, it's a hard act to follow, but I did get back into it. I bought an airplane, a Cessna P210 pressurized, turbocharged, wonderful little airplane, and I got the pressurized because Karen wasn't a happy passenger at first, but she got to be pretty good at it. So it was a great extender of a weekend off or whatever. And my folks were alive at the time and living up in Wyoming, and I could go up there and back in an hour, And
did anyone in your family have any interest in aviation?
Well, it's kind of funny. I didn't think so. Our kids flew with us. We flew from coast to coast almost, and our daughter didn't really say anything. And then one day we got a call from her when she was going to school at University of Oregon, and she said, "By the way, I'm taking flying lessons at this community college there," and so she really picked it up and really got all her ratings. She got eventually to be an ATP, an airline transport pilot. Flew float planes in Alaska. Flew, landed on sandbars and glaciers, and she got to be a pretty experienced pilot in her own right.
I've flown up there.
She flew for a number of years for Era Aviation out of Anchorage to the North Slope in Twin Otters initially, and then she upgraded to the Dash 8, which is the twin prop plane that flies out of Aspen quite a bit. And,
did you ever fly any missions with her or make any trips with her?
Yes. Now that you mentioned, we did have a fun adventure trip planned, and I flew a number of missions for years with this environmental flying service called Lighthawk around here.
Lighthawk, I'm familiar with that.
And I won't go into all the details, but did a lot from coast to coast and border to border almost. Well, not coast to coast, but as far east as Louisville, Kentucky to Washington State and Montana to Arizona, and quite a bit, excuse me, in Central America, Nicaragua and Honduras, environmental things. But anyway, in the course of this Lighthawk tie, I got to meet this old Marine aviator from World War II who used to fly Corsairs.
Oh yeah,
and he tremendously accomplished. Tremendously accomplished pilot, and so anyway, we got together and cooked up this idea to fly over to Germany. And so I did that
across the Atlantic in a
single engine.
Single engine. That sounds like Charles Lindbergh.
Well, he was right. He said you only need one engine. I had a fresh engine and a fresh prop at the time, and so it wasn't really risky. It was fun. It was a great adventure. It was, and anyway, so this Lighthawk fellow from Colorado Springs flew with me, and he got out in England and went back, and I went on alone to Germany. And meanwhile, our daughter Allison and her fiance came over commercially and biked around Europe for a while, and we met up with our friends in Bitburg, and she flew home with me, and I let her do most of the flying on the way home.
Well, I asked you the route. Could you show us the map?
Well, let's see.
A little bit there.
Let's see if I can
Of
find
how
it
you got
readily.
refueled is interesting to me. And
The route we went was the longest over water leg is less than 700 miles. You know, most people don't realize it.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Is
this is kind of floppy here.
Yeah. There you
But
go. There you go.
anyway, this is like Bangor, Maine. So we flew from here to Maine and got an extra fuel tank put in, and then went up to Goose Bay.
Goose Bay.
Yeah, and then over to Nuuk, Greenland.
Greenland.
And then across the Greenland ice cap to Iceland, and then down to Scotland, and then over to Germany.
Did you go to Bitburg?
Yeah,
With
which
that
was
aircraft?
it was quite a trip in that that was already closed by that time, and but we had friends there that got us a special permit to land there. It was a privatized airport run by the brewery, so I got permission to land at our old Air Force base and put my hangar in one of these old hardened hangar sites that we used to use during Phantom days.
Our logger just signaled to me that we're getting to the end of the film, so we'll just start closing this up. Do you think that having been a veteran played any part of your success in life as a civilian?
Well, yeah, of course, it makes you who you are, and it gave me I think the confidence to do things that I might not have otherwise. You know, you get to choose your path pretty succinctly and pretty definitely, and we went for the lodging thing, which I don't know if I'd had the without that kind of experience it was a big chunk for us to take off. And
it turns
put
out
everything
that
into
Aspen has been very supportive of the veterans. You were at our Veterans Day memorial, and the disabled veterans, the whole community turns out.
It's a tremendous experience
for that.
Really like it.
I'd like to just get back to fighter pilot Robin Olds, the memoirs of him. Can you just tell me a little bit of you meeting him in Thailand and other places?
Well, as I said, he was our wing commander there in Ubon the first time I came in, and unfortunately I didn't have enough time with him as I liked. But he was legendary, as you say. After he was just such a tremendous personality, very strong, huge presence. He was an All-American football player at West Point, and the bearing, that was just incredible. But he had a kind of a rebellious attitude, and it really raised the esprit de corps. And I've never seen a leader like him. He was just wonderful.
We had Chesty Puller in the Marine Corps. Same thing.
People would follow him anywhere. He was great. And anyway, much to his chagrin, he was assigned to be the Commandant of Cadets at the Air Force Academy out of Ubon.
Just over the hill.
Yeah, so no more flying days as a fighter pilot. So but he was a legendary partier and just.
Did you ever see him back in the States?
Well, yeah, it was quite an encounter. I was standing in line at Bonnie's one day, and I hear this booming voice, familiar voice behind me, and I look around, and he's got this fanny pack on his front with the 8th Attack Fighter Wing thing on it, and I make some snide fighter pilot comment that only a fighter pilot would know, and he picked up on it right away and roared, and anyway, make a long story short, he invited us to the party he was having that night with some of his old longtime friends, and he eventually ended up coming and staying with us at the lodge, and we got to talk and meet, and tremendous guy.
Real story.
He ended up being, after he retired from the Air Force, he became a county commissioner up at Steamboat, Routt County. Yeah.
Well, he's one of us skiers.
And he passed away in
He
2007.
lived to be 85 years old.
Yeah.
And did you attend those services?
Vital right up until the end, yeah. And it just happened that our daughter and son-in-law and grandsons were visiting at the time of his passing, and all of his, there's a network and we communicate, and we were invited to the memorial service at the Academy Chapel.
Flyover.
And we walk up to the chapel with the grandson in hand, and cadets lining the stairs all the way up for about 100 yards, or not 100 yards, but a long way up the stairway going in. And my grandson, he was 4 at the time, he looks up and he said, "Tell me about this man." And I just like, oh man, yeah, I could. So this is my way of telling him about the man.
Well,
at some point I'll be
maybe
able to share that.
we could close with this poem that was read at his memorial service.
Yeah, this is a fairly well-known poem in aviation circles, and it really speaks to what you really feel in your heart about flying, particularly a fighter airplane, and how special it was. I hope I can convey that. It was a memorable time for us. But anyway, it's called High Flight. And this was written by a pilot in World War II flying Spitfires, and he didn't survive more than a few months past this. And he penned this on a flight, test flight, and sent it to his dad, and has become basically an aviator's anthem. High Flight. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, and wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air, up, up the long, delirious, burning blue. I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
Well, that's very moving and very special to you.
Bring tears to my eyes.
I know, and I thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being with us today, Heinz. So I'd like to present you with a pin that you support the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project and the Library of Congress and Aspen Historical Society.
Dick, thank you for doing all these.
Oh,
and
you're
your
welcome.
work on this. It's
Our
been a real pleasure.
It's a real honor,
you.
and here's
Thank
the
you.
pin. Thank
Thanks
you
a lot.
very
My
much.
pleasure.
Thank you. And in closing, I'd just like to mention that if you are, for more information about the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project or to make a donation, please contact Kip Hubbard at the Aspen Historical Society at 925-3721. Thank you. I'll close.